Hi, this is my review of Maelstrom's Edge, Battle for Zycanthus. This is the starter box set for the awesome science fiction squad-based wargame known as Maelstrom's Edge. This box set contains everything that you need to start playing the game. It contains two complete forces of two of the main factions, that is the Carest Enclave and the Empyrean Foundation. Let's start by talking about the setting of Maelstrom's Edge. The setting is quite catastrophic. It feels like a universe in crisis, to put it in a way. Let's take a look at what happened in the past first. Because the setting takes place many years in the future, many years, we have no idea where planet Earth is. We only have like a basic notion that humans started traveling into the farther reaches of outer space and started trying to colonize different planets. However, this was quite difficult because humans didn't have an efficient way to travel quickly throughout space, and many of those missions were suicidal. Many ships did not make it to their destination, but some humans actually made it and started to colonize and terraform different planets. Although this process was lengthy, all of the missions took quite a bit of a while, because some of them, because they took perhaps hundreds of years. Those that set out with the idea of colonizing the different world or terraforming a planet, they died, and they had to entrust that mission to their children and their children's children. So at the very beginning, you have that sense of discovery, but intricately bound to risk and death. Later on, humanity once again made that journey with the attempt to colonize different worlds and with their terraforming projects, but they had more advanced technology and different processes that assisted them in this endeavor. Something that greatly enhanced the ability of humanity to expand was the discovery of Cybele tunnels. And Cybele tunnels are these very sometimes narrow pathways that are wider near larger masses, for example a really large planet, but it's quite risky to travel within them. They were discovered by experimenting with electromagnetic fields and pulses, and they eventually integrated this electromagnetic technology into the engines of different ships. But there was still a lot of risk. For example, if your ship collided with the walls of these Cybele tunnels, the ship would be destroyed. Something quite eerie of these Cybele tunnels is that sometimes you can see the ghosts of the ships that were destroyed in the past. They kind of left like their imprint in the walls of the Cybele tunnel. So humanity kept moving forward and eventually met other alien races and species. There were a bit of some conflicts, but there were also some diplomatic encounters, and they got along fine with some of the species. And now, before we go further, let's talk about the factions that are presented here in the box sets. We have the Empyrean Foundation, and they have a very strong, like, corporate capitalist feel to them. They are all about developing technology and planning ahead on how to terraform different planets and make them hospitable. They actually rely a lot on robots, specifically robots controlled with this interface attached to the helmets of the different contractors, or the bot handlers, to put it in a better way. And so these robots are kind of like dolls, to put it. They are not piloting the robot from inside. They are controlling them in a sort of like a remote control type of way. And these robots could enter different hostile environments, toxic planets and such, and start cultivating different bacteria and organisms that will make a certain planet habitable for humanity. And then we also have the Carest Enclave, and I am going to use this part of the story to introduce what the Maelstrom is. The Maelstrom is a thing of mystery. It's this destructive wave that keeps moving forward, ever expanding and destroying everything in its wake. The Maelstrom was a surprise for everyone. This shattered the governance of the Empyrean Foundation to the point that many of the different owners of franchises that were grouped under the Empyrean Foundation organization, and they started to claim ownership or leadership upon the entire Empyrean Foundation, and that sent the entire foundation into a crisis of sorts. So there was this desperation of people trying to escape from the planets because the Maelstrom is ever growing. It's kind of like a growing black hole of sorts, to put it in a way. It keeps ever expanding, and it even sends the Cybele tunnels into chaos. Sometimes it uses the Cybele tunnels to enter into traveling through different sections of outer space. And because of that, sometimes different humans try to destroy the gateways to the Cybele tunnels so that the Maelstrom doesn't travel through those tunnels and gets there quicker. So what are the Carest Enclave members? There was this passenger liner that was traveling through this section attacked by the Maelstrom, and the Carest Enclave are the survivors. The founders of this enclave are the survivors of some of those passengers. Most of the passengers in that ship died a horrible death, devoured by the Maelstrom, but some others, a few others, actually survived in this almost like a drug-infused state. It kind of looks like that, and they had these visions of glory that the Maelstrom was not evil, that it was a force that purifies everything, and only the worthy, those that are purified in body and spirit, will be saved by the Maelstrom. And the Carest Enclave, in general, they have a bit like sort of like a socialist cult sort of organization, but everything is focused on the Maelstrom as an agent of purification. And so they travel across the planets, offering their message of salvation, because the Empyrean Foundation only rescues those that are useful for the corporations. So if you're not like, for example, an engineer or very wealthy, they also take the wealthy in, you will probably be left behind. So it's a very ruthless foundation, and because of that, many of their contractors fight really hard for the corporation because they don't want to be left behind, and or their families to be left in a planet doomed to be destroyed by the Maelstrom. So the Carest Enclave goes through the different planets, telling people that the Maelstrom is actually something that will take them to a new state of transcendence, that it's sort of like an illumination process. But the Maelstrom also deforms part of your body. It's kind of like a radioactive energy, to put it in a way, and you start suffering the effects of it. And some of the members of the Carest Enclave actually take different substances to try to control that, but although that is frowned upon, because most of the members of the Carest Enclave see it as a sort of like not being faithful to the Carest Enclave. And then we have some other factions that actually don't have too much detail when compared to the Empyrean Foundation and the Carest Enclave. One of those factions are the Broken, and those are all of the poor people that were left behind when the Foundation started to board those ships, and telling others that they couldn't board because they didn't have space or they weren't useful for the corporations. The Broken, they weren't exactly very well trained and didn't have the best in terms of technology, but there were a lot of people, so they attacked many of the centers and hangars where they had ships, and they took control of many ships and resources, and so they feel a bit like a ragtag band, to put it in a way, and they contain all sorts of people. They can contain perhaps pirates, they could contain freedom fighters, they even have aliens within their ranks. They have like this insectoid race and this other race of aliens that seem a bit more like slow and brutish but very powerful. As I was telling you, they don't give you too much detail when it comes to that, the Broken faction, but they're probably planning to release a new army because the Maelstrom's Edge has just begun. So we'll probably see an army of the Broken in the future, maybe. You also have details on the Remnant Fleet, And these are humans that were more advanced. They seem even utopical, to put it in a way. They had this very advanced civilization. They had virtually no wars. All of their conflicts were fought out with teams of gladiators. And they were quite diplomatic, at least when compared to what you would expect of a civilization in outer space. But they had to run away. They are known as the Remnant Fleet because they had to evacuate their places of habitation when the Maelstrom struck, so they are traveling in these giant ships, and they feel quite elite. These gladiators that fight their conflicts almost look like sports stars, to put it in a way, but they are equipped in very high-tech suits, so I get the feeling that if they are ever brought out as an army, they will probably have very few models, but those models will be worth a lot. And you also have other factions such as the Kaigus Pact, and these are all the remnants of the first humans who started colonizing outer space. These were humans that perhaps were stranded in outer space with no planet to call as their own, and so their bodies had to adapt to the situation because of the absence of constant pressure and gravity. They became very thin and dull, and they have to use all sorts of bioengineering techniques, like cultivating different types of mineral structures and fungi and such to create armor and weapons, and even their ships. Their ships have a bit of an organic feel to them. I imagine them a bit like aliens from H.R. Geiger. And then you have the Com Guild. And the Com Guild were the keepers of the gateways of the Cybele tunnels, but when the Maelstrom happened, their entire organization collapsed, and because they were sort of like information brokers, they were the ones in charge of communicating what was happening in different sectors of the galaxy. And so their entire organization went down, and they're a bit obsessed on hunting down robots because there was a Terminator-like crisis concerning AI in the past. So they're kind of like always trying to destroy those robots that seem too sentient for their own good. And then you have the Dragonite host, and the Dragonite host are very strange. They are these alien beings that have sort of like a mineral type coral semi-watery bodies contained in sort of like power suits, and they require water for their existence, a lot of water. So even their ships feel a bit like they are like fish tanks, to put it in a way. And they aren't very pleased with humanity. They think that humanity has something to do with the Maelstrom's edge. They find it quite suspicious that it happened near the capital planets of humanity. Now let's talk a bit about the components of the box. You have everything that you need to play, and some pretty cool stuff. So for example, something that caught my attention immediately is the terrain spruce that comes within the box. Instead of including large pieces of terrain, or not including terrain at all, they include these sprues with different bits and pieces, so you can use those to turn pretty much anything in a piece of scenery into a piece of scenery. So for example, I have this, I'm still working on it, and I use the different pieces of the spruce. This is basically Greek yogurt cup, the ones that you buy at HEB, and I turn it upside down, and as you can see, let me see if I can get a closer look. I turn it into a sort of like emergency research station, or perhaps like a little bunker of sorts, or perhaps an apartment for one of the Empyrean contractors. So you can build pretty much anything that you like or want with the pieces of the spruce, and that's really nice. You're going to get your creative juices flowing, thinking of all the ways in which you can use different plastic pieces. And you also have a lot of dice. You have 4 of each of these colors. You have red, black, and white. And that's because when you play the game, you're going to see different values for different weapons, and this allows you to tell them apart. You also have these really cool, they're called stress tokens. They look like little explosions. And they come in different sizes and different colors because the Carest Enclave uses different they use Cybele energy, which is a refined form of the energy found within the Cybele tunnels. And so that's a cool way of telling apart the attacks, and they come in different sizes, so you can measure the stress. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. You also have these templates for the different attacks with a different color in each of the sides. They are very sturdy. It's thick cardboard, as you can hear. And you also have these a lot of little tokens giving different command points and marking different objectives. And they're also quite sturdy. They're a bit thinner when it comes to the card, but they are still quite sturdy. You also have some markers to see how many victory points you gain throughout the game, because this is a game where you obtain victory by fulfilling different objectives that give you points. You also have a few cards detailing all different units, different missions, etc. So it's quite handy. You don't need to look at the rulebook all the time to see what the objective is. You also have a card game, and I will cover that at the end of this review. Now let's talk a bit about the miniatures. The miniatures are awesome. Just take a look at this. I'm still working on it. I'm almost done with it. And this is an angel. Because the Carest Enclave has tamed these strange beings known as angels, and they're basically like ravenous creatures. They were driven insane by the Maelstrom, and they're constantly hungry for Cybele energy. And the Carest Enclave lures them and controls them using feeding them Cybele energy, and even painting their opponents with Cybele energy, so that it's kind of like covering something with blood and then releasing a predator, so the angels immediately attack those enemies marked by the Carest Enclave. So you get a lot of miniatures, and they look really good, and it's really easy to paint them. The detail is pretty clear, and even if you pile a couple or perhaps 3 layers of paint, you don't lose any detail. And it's also quite high quality plastic, in my opinion. It looks really good, really sturdy as well. Now let's talk about the game, how you play Maelstrom's Edge. Each turn is divided in 3 phases: command phase, action phase, and end phase. After determining priority, that is to see who goes first, you generate command points, you declare reserves and reinforcements, and then you allocate command points. Command points are a very important currency in the game. They basically allow you to remove stress from your units using one of your models that has the command ability. And they also allow you to enter this sort of like a bidding war when reintroducing reinforcements into the battlefield. And so you have to keep track and think ahead if you want to make a bluff. Maybe you're constantly spending command points to remove stress tokens, and the opponent thinks that you're not too worried about bringing out reinforcements. But there's also a possibility of bluffing, of not really using any of your points in the bidding war, and that way you can trick your opponent to spending a lot of command points when he wants to bring a unit back into the battlefield. Another cool feature is that scouts have a different way of entering the battlefield as reinforcements, and you can even set up ambushes to stop enemy reinforcements from entering during a particular turn. And then we have the action phase. In the action phase, it's when you activate your models, or specifically your units, because this is a squad-based game. You're going to move several models at the same time as a single body, to put it in a way. Everything rolls around the leader of a particular unit. That is, that leader of that unit is going to be checking for a line of sight. Sometimes it also has to do with taking cover, but taking cover takes into consideration how many models within or that is behind cover or outside of cover are seen by the enemy. And the rules for cover are quite solid. You basically only enter into cover when your units touch the object that you're going to use as cover. If they're kind of like ambiguously placed near some scenery object, it's not going to count as cover. But because of that, you also have many different options during your actions. Maybe you want to run into the open field, and that will actually allow you to move further ahead. And one cool thing is that you can roll your dice to see if you can move, to see how much you will move in the open ground. And if you think it's too little, you can say, no, you know what, that's too risky. I'm going to get behind cover. And you also have a way to, for example, to kind of like zigzag across the battlefield. It's a different mode. Let me see if I can find the cheat sheet, because I recommend that you visit the website, because they have a lot of material here that's going to make the gameplay easier. Here it is. So when you move around, you may, for example, choose to dig in. And this gives you a bonus to protect your units, a cover bonus, to put it in a way. But you can also enter into different modes, such as, let me see if I can find it here. Here it is. Sorry, I thought I was going to find it here. Here it is. Dash. You make a double move, and you can elect to be on the move. When you elect to be on the move, that means that you're going to be harder to hit. But you could also choose to charge an enemy if that enemy is too close, and you can try to defeat him in close quarters combat. You can also hold on fire, which allows you to use focused fire or suppressive fire. Focused fire makes it easier for you to hit an opponent, and suppressive fire puts a bit more stress on the unit. Now, what is stress? Maybe you didn't deal too much damage to an enemy because that enemy was behind cover. Maybe you dealt quite a bit of damage that, even though it didn't kill too many units, it still adds that amount of stress. And if you get too many stress tokens, you won't be able to activate that unit the way you want it to. They're going to take some, put it in a way, panicked action of sorts, and it makes them less effective. So you really have to take in mind when you want to move your units, because, for example, maybe you go first during a turn and you want to move a unit with a lot of stress tokens. I wouldn't recommend that, because when you make your check to see if you get out of that stressed state, you may actually fail and you will not be able to perform the actions that you wanted to. Now let's talk about checks. This game uses a very simple mechanic when it comes to making rolls. If you're going to fight, if you're going to shoot, if you're going to perform a discipline check, you make a versus roll. You basically take a statistic or ability and match it against another value, and you make a roll depending on which one is greater. So, for example, maybe you want to make an attack roll, and it says, if the attacker value is at least double the defender value, then you only need a 2. But, for example, 2 or plus in a 6-sided die. So, or for example, if you have an attacker value that is equal to or lower than the defender value, but not by more than half, you're going to need only a 4 or more. But there will be times, so for example, there is this wildfire situation when an enemy is attacking you and you get to respond, and you need a 6 to hit. And that's something really cool as well. If there's a unit within 6 inches of you and you try to charge that unit or attack it with your guns, that unit will get to respond by making a round of wildfire. So you have many choices when it comes to how to react to situations. You have to think not only of how you're going to attack, but how you're going to respond to the enemy attacks. You can also use grenades when you charge at the enemy to get that enemy a bit more stressed. And stress, it's also important to remember that it feels a bit more like wounds as well, like minor injuries. Because when you play out missions, after carrying out a bidding war to see who is the attacker and the defender, the difference between that bidding war is going to determine how many stress tokens your entire army starts with. So they're considered more like the injuries and perhaps the just like the wariness that your army suffered as when going through a minefield or running under enemy fire. When you arrive finally to fight a particular mission. Let's talk about missions. Missions give you about 3 objectives. One of those objectives is specific for each of the factions, but 2 objectives are always random, so you never know what to expect. Maybe you need to assassinate a particular model. Maybe you need to capture some ground or protect something. It's always something that makes the game it makes you consider working around not just killing the enemy. It's also about taking control of different areas or targeting specific objectives, and that way it doesn't feel just like a slugfest. It feels like you're actually taking into account 3 things that will present to you the path to victory. And the faction objectives are also quite different. For example, the Empyrean Foundation has this little robot that you have to protect, and you can also move it around. It feels like an additional model in your army, and it will give you victory points if you keep it safe. And the Carest Enclave also have this cache of cult supplies that are deployed somewhere in the battlefield, and they have to reach that cache and take control of it, and it will also give them victory points each turn. So each turn you start gaining victory points by fulfilling different objectives until 5 turns or more, depending on the scenario, pass. That's when the game ends, and the player with the most victory points wins. And I'm letting out a lot of different things. For example, each unit has different abilities, and they feel quite unique to the factions. So for example, the Empyrean Foundation, they feel a bit like the healers. They have these contractors that repair robots as they get stressed out or damaged. And you also have these awesome looking mechs, the hunters, that specialize in, they're pretty much walking tanks. It's a bit hard to get them into position, but once they are there, they can unleash destruction upon your enemy. You also have Firefly Recon drones that allow you to fly across the battlefield over different cover pieces and such. You also have Spider drones that are also quite fast, although a bit fragile, not as agile as the Firefly in my opinion. And you also have the Scarecrow snipers, which are again robots controlled via that interface, and they are pretty good at ranged combat. And you have the Journeyman bot handler, which is like the commander of the army that comes with this box, and the contractor engineers that I was telling you that repair robots. Now, when it comes to the Carest Enclave, they feel really somewhat alien and metaphysical at times. Starting with the angels, that you have the mature and the Angel Minos version, and the different types of angels are suited for more different tasks. So for example, the mature angel is a powerhouse, and you will want that mature angel fighting the hunter androids that I was telling you about. But the Angel Minnow is quite fast, and it's great not to capture objectives because it cannot. It's part of its trait, but it's pretty good to perform hit and run attacks. The Kedar Nova is the leader of the Carest Enclave, at least in this box set, and he has this gauntlet. It's really cool because it allows him to lift this force field around him, or it also makes him perform this powerful telekinetic attack. He may even perform a self-destruct action, and if you actually manage to kill models with it, you will gain victory points as well. You also have the Carest Troopers, which are the meat and potatoes of the Carest Force. They're quite fanatical, and the Tempest lives with. They have these very powerful destructive shots. They could even make an enemy retreat. That is, it's a slow weapon. One of the versions of the cannons are slow weapons that the enemy has to choose if he wants to take the hit or if he wants to retreat. So it's a good way to clear a particular quadrant or section of the battlefield. And you also have the Shadowwalkers, and they feel a bit like teleporting ninja, to put it in a way. And all of the different units have different ways to customize them. You have many options to swap out weapons, and the sprues that come in the box to create the miniatures have all of the options for you to create a unit based on your array of weapons. But you can also convert many things. I recommend that you visit the website. They will give you some tips on how to make conversions, and they actually give you a lot of rules so that you can make all those cool conversions and still keep it legal. The entire rulebook is great. This is a very sturdy little rulebook, and it's in full color. You're going to have all the examples. For example, here they're telling you how to do sort of like a hit and run attack. And I'm really leaving out a lot of different abilities. This is a very deep and complex, but not complicated game, to put it, if that makes sense. So you will have many ways in which you can achieve victory. This is a game that turns do not become tedious, because you're always thinking on what a special ability or power to use and what weapon to achieve a particular objective. Really nice rulebook. And now let's talk about the card game. This is a bonus game that comes in the box, and the rulebook, well, it doesn't have a rulebook. It has a living rule set that you can find in the website, and it's constantly being updated. So you can have a look and see how the game plays out. I've tried it, and it feels a bit like a combination of push your luck and bluffing. You are basically drawing resources from different planets, and you start deploying fleets and different cards that allow you to draw out more resources while protecting that planet for you. And the enemy can attack you and take resources. And then there's also the Maelstrom card, of course, that represents the destruction of a planet. So that you have that sense of urgency that all of the planets are being destroyed, and you're trying to be the player that will draw the most resources from the planets. The player with the most resources, of course, is the winner. And the card game is pretty short. It takes about like 15 to 20 minutes. And the base game, that is the army game of the Maelstrom's Age, it takes a bit of a while when you are still learning the rules. My first game took about like 2.5 hours, but with a bit of practice, for example, last time I managed to shorten it by 20 minutes. So probably when you are more familiar with the rule set of Maelstrom's Edge, it will probably take between an hour and a half or something. Now, let me tell you what I think of the entire box set. First, the setting. The setting is awesome. I can't wait to see all of those different models of the different factions. It's a setting of crisis and urgency and desperation of trying to escape this destructive Maelstrom while fighting others to take resources and just to survive at times. Now, when it comes to the contents of this box set, this is high value. All of the models are high quality, the components as well. Also, something that I really liked is that everything came bubble wrapped, protecting everything. That's a really nice detail. There are some companies that do not do that. It feels almost like insulting at times. But here they protect everything quite well, so everything comes in. You're going to get everything intact. And when it comes to the game, this is really fun and really deep in its most tactical and strategic sense, squad-based war game. It really hits a sweet spot between something too streamlined and something really complicated. And this is coming from someone who plays Age of Sigmar and BattleTech. So I feel it feels like it's a middle ground of sorts. And you have a lot of sheets that will help you to run a smooth game. Just visit the website. Sorry, let me see if I can get that into focus. And you have all the different structure for the actions. specific sheets for different armies or factions with details on their weapons and their abilities. And of course, during gameplay, you're not going to use all of them, but this is still pretty handy for the specific weapons that you chose for a unit. So I really enjoyed playing Maelstrom's Edge. There are a lot of rules, as I was telling you, that I left out because it's really quite complex, but it's not complicated. You have rules for buildings and getting into buildings, getting into close quarters, fighting inside a building, different ports that you can use to shoot out of a building using as a sort of like a bunker, and different synergies between the units are also quite important to achieve your objectives during the missions. So I really enjoyed it, and I also like the fact that a more skilled or experienced player can easily win against someone who just started playing. This is a game that punishes blunders. If you make a tactical error, you're going to suffer for it quite a bit. So I highly recommend that you get this box set, the Battle for Zycanthus. And the card game as well. The card, for being a simple card game, is also quite fun. So I recommend that you enjoy the entire experience and that you also play around with the terrain sprue that comes inside. I also like it that even though the rule set is quite robust and deep, it's also quite easy for someone who has never played a miniatures war game before to get into Maelstrom's Edge. So get this game seriously, it's really cool. Thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.